Since I made some trades for wide receivers, I don't hate myself when I make this video now. Starting off with the S tier options. There are really only going to be 3 names. You can rank them in whatever order that you want. It's going to be Puka Nacua, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Garrett Wilson. With Puka, there's a chance he's actually good to go starting in week 9, and he's already gone through his bye week, which means you're going to get him for just as many games, if not more games, in comparison to what you're going to have with Ja'Marr Chase rest of season, where Chase is yet to go through his bye. But again, you also do have Jackson Smith-Njigba already through his bye as well. If we look at Puka Nacua while he was healthy, you're actually looking at a wide receiver that scored 23, 27, 22, 36, and 24.5 points. Absolutely incredible. And obviously we can throw out the game against the Baltimore Ravens in which he got injured. Then looking at JSN is averaging 117 receiving yards per game. Y'all know JSN was my favorite round 3 wide receiver in Underdog drafts, which is aging like fine wine. Love my Underdog portfolio right now. And that's because he scored 27 points for 3 games straight. It does look like Sam Darnold is a viable quarterback. And then lastly, with Ja'Marr Chase, he's actually number 1 in the NFL right now in targets per game with 12.4. And a big reason for this is we have seen Joe Flacco come in and say, you know what? The only thing that I'm going to do is throw the ball to Ja'Marr no matter what. Over the past 3 weeks, Ja'Marr Chase has had 10 receptions in every single game. Over the past 2 weeks, he's had 42 targets. So yeah, you can rank these wide receivers whatever order you want. Our next name is going to be CeeDee Lamb. If you wanted to put Lamb behind Amon-Ra St. Brown, you do you. That's why we make these rankings as tier lists. I understand that the Dallas Cowboys offense was very much disappointing this past week, but I am expecting a bounce back from Dallas going into the future. Then looking at Amon-Ra St. Brown, goes through the bye week, so you're going to have him every single game going into the future. And if we look at St. Brown so far this season, he's currently averaging 21 points per game, which is pretty much identical to what you have with Ja'Marr Chase. Difference is St. Brown's doing a lot of this with touchdowns, where you actually have 7 touchdowns off of only 61 targets. So you would assume that maybe this touchdown rate is a little bit unsustainable, but I want to remind you that the Detroit Lions will be scoring touchdowns at a much higher clip than what you have with some of the other wide receivers in the NFL. Now, going over and looking at B tier, we are going to have Justin Jefferson, who's currently averaging 15.5 points per contest. I mean, ultimately, this is a wide receiver that has had 4 straight games with 10 or more targets, but I want to point out, those games were with Carson Wentz. Now that we're going to get J.J. McCarthy back into this offense, the concern is Justin Jefferson scales back and goes a little bit closer to what you had in weeks 1, 2, and 3, where he was averaging about 12, 13 points per contest. Then Rashee Rice will be our wide receiver 7. I'm going to be live streaming after the Chiefs game tonight, and I'll be showing you the updated rankings, so just make sure you are subscribed. I'm making this video before that Chiefs game gets kicked off. Ja'Marr Chase's expectations for tonight, Underdog Fantasy currently has him higher lower 67.5 receiving yards and higher lower 13.25 fantasy points. Now, of course, if you wanted to go through, if you wanted to check out any of those projections, go higher, lower, I'll leave the link to Underdog Fantasy in the description as well as the comment section. If you're not already on Underdog, code FLOCK will get you $100 added to your account after you play your first 5. Plus, you'll get a free Patrick Mahomes pick, higher, lower, half a total yard for that Monday night game. And you'll get free questions for the live streams. And I'm live streaming answering your questions every single day until Christmas. You can find that link in the description and comment section. Now, Puka will be our next option. Puka's played 3 straight games with fewer than 10 fantasy points scored. So I completely understand if you are frustrated, but I want to remind you, Puka got injured against the Niners in week 6. Then he played that week 7 game when he really shouldn't have. He still had 12 targets. And then in week 8, keep in mind, I still thought he was going to be out that game after the week 6 injury. I mean, it was a game in which the New Orleans Saints just weren't able to put points up on the board against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Baker Mayfield didn't really have to drop back to pass very often. And there just wasn't a lot of passing volume in general. So I still have full faith in Puka. I do want to point out, though, that you should have Chris Godwin on the return at some point after the bye week. Now, moving over to our C tier, this is where things get a little bit bigger. And I may be very biased because I just traded for Rome Odunze. I'm sure if you watch the Flock League, you already know I traded Cam Scadaboo for Judkins. Then I immediately flipped Judkins for Rome. Feeling pretty good about it after we just had Rome Odunze with 10 targets, 7 receptions, 114 receiving yards, going right back to where he was before the bye week, showing that that 2-week sample against Washington and New Orleans does look like a little bit of an outlier. The reason I felt comfortable trading for Rome is this is an alpha wide receiver that was a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. He showed us the breakout at the beginning of the season, and that's something that you want to buy into, and I am doing so myself. This next week against the Cincinnati Bengals, he will be incredibly high in our rankings based off of the Jets were able to do against this defense. Drake London is currently averaging about 16 points per game. Now, the issue that I'm going to have when ranking London is I have no idea the health of Michael Penix, and I have no idea the health of Drake London himself. There's not a guarantee that Drake London's playing this next game, and there's not a guarantee that Michael Penix is. To be honest with you, these rankings are kind of based on the idea that they'll probably both be playing this next week, but we just don't know yet. This will be something that we have to continue to update throughout the week, and you could see London fall all the way down to D tier dependent on the injury updates that we get. Now, again, I could be very biased here. I just traded for Nico Collins. I traded T. Higgins and Stephon Diggs to get Nico Collins on my fantasy team. So now, at least in my opinion, I have 2 wide receiver ones rest of season. Feel very excited about it. Obviously, Nico misses this past week against the Niners with the concussion. Going to be a little bit of a tougher matchup in week 9 against the Denver Broncos, but he's already through his bye week. And if we look at the games in which Nico Collins played fully healthy in, it was 5 of them where he had 5.5, 14.2, 22.4, about 12, and then 16 fantasy points. So if you just use the player comparison tool on flockfantasy.com, and this is completely free, you can do this whenever. Maybe it's a little bit deceiving when you throw Nico Collins in there initially and you see that he's only averaging 12.8 points per game. But if you just focus in on those first 5 weeks and when he was healthy and not playing injured, that does go up to about 13.5 points per game with a 27.5% team target share. Now, moving over to the next name we are going to have, it will be George Pickens. The Dallas Cowboys struggled this past week, but George Pickens still gets there, and he's actually had, decent volume even with CeeDee Lamb back in this offense over the past 2 weeks, where he's had a total of 150 receiving yards. The reason I'm going to give the wide receivers in this tier a slight nod over Pickens is he has yet to go through his bye week, which is going to be in week 10, so you'll have him in 1 game fewer than what you're going to get with Nico, London, and Rome. Now, Devontae Adams will be our next name. Devontae Adams very easily could move up these rankings in a dramatic way if you have no Puka Nacua. But my expectations right now will be that Puka Nacua is back in week 9. If that isn't the case, then obviously Puka will slide down. Adams will slide up these ranks. Garrett Wilson, I can't say for sure, but he gets injured in week 6. And they do not put him on the IR. He's missed week 7 and 8. He had the week 9 bye anyway. So there's a very real possibility that Garrett Wilson is back in either week 10 or week 11. I will say, though, that that's not a guarantee. So if you are currently sitting here at 2 and 6 and you get the opportunity to potentially go out there and sell Garrett Wilson for another wide receiver in this tier when you need wins right now, I probably would do it. Like, I would sell him for Ladd McConkey. Ladd McConkey has put together an incredible month of games where over the past month, he is averaging 10 points per game. Where over the past month, he is averaging about 10 targets per game, and he's averaging about 20 fantasy points per game. Now, sadly, he is taking this away from our king, the Big Q, who I hope can get back on track soon. But in reality, I will say there's a lot of competition for Ladd McConkey for targets, where you have Gadsden, Keenan, and Quentin Johnston. And then if Amari Hampton comes back in later, maybe this is a team that goes back to trying to run the ball. And then our last wide receiver in this tier is going to be Chris Olave. You may have the transition over to Tyler Shuck, but ultimately Olave so far this season has had 83 targets in 8 games played. So he's averaging over 10 targets a game, 10.4 to be exact, and averaging more points per game than Ladd McConkey, than Nico Collins, and arguably you could move him up higher in this tier given the floor that he gives you. Now, moving down to our next tier, we are going to have Zay Flowers leading us off. I thought that we were going to get Lamar Jackson back in week 8. Very clearly, we were wrong. But the hope now is that you get Lamar Jackson back in week 9. I believe they're going to be playing on the short week on Thursday, which is going to be a little bit of a concern for that. But the initial reports that we got on Sunday are looking positive for his availability. Now, moving over to Devonta Smith, we are very much going to have to monitor the A.J. Brown hamstring injury and if this is actually an injury. I don't know if this was a troll that I saw on Twitter, but I did see somebody post on Twitter that you actually have A.J. Brown listing his house for sale on Zillow. And as a Zillow expert, that's where I spend my free time. I can say it looked legit. It did not look photoshopped. So if A.J. Brown's on the way out, you could see Devonta Smith move all the way up to being a B tier wide receiver for us in these ranks. Courtland Sutton, with the disappointing game against the Dallas Cowboys with only 10.5 fantasy points, it does fall down to actually only averaging 13.8 points per game. But Bo Nix has been playing incredibly well, and I still do believe that Courtland Sutton is going to be the wide receiver one here over Troy Franklin rest of season. Michael Pittman Jr. has been playing incredibly well. Actually, helped us hit on an underdog pick'em this past week and crushing for our underdog best ball teams. Y'all know we drafted a ton of Pittman, which I feel great about. I still think that it's a little bit unsustainable, like 6 touchdowns with 56 targets. But maybe we just have to reevaluate this Indianapolis Colts offense and go, well, if we're going to say that Amon-Ra St. Brown can continue to outproduce touchdowns compared to, what we had historically expect, maybe we should say the same exact thing with Michael Pittman if we want to believe that the Indianapolis Colts offense is an elite option going into the future, which seems like that is the case. Then A.J. Brown will be our last wide receiver in this tier. I have no idea what's going on right now. He's averaging 12.5 fantasy points per game, which is actually lower than any wide receiver that we've talked about so far in this video. And at the same time with A.J. Brown, you can actually say that you have him injured and you have a potential trade. So there's just so much uncertainty, but I do really like the upside that you have. So it's going to be hard for me to move him down to E tier. Now, Tedero McMillan will be our next option. You actually have him with a career high 7 receptions in this game, gives you about 17 fantasy points. Base expectation for me always is going to be that rookie wide receivers continue to get better as time goes on. So he's already proven that he's an extremely talented option. The big issue that you have, of course, is just going to be, can you actually get in, decent quarterback play from this team from Bryce Young, which probably isn't going to happen. Now, DK Metcalf is the wide receiver 3 on my fantasy team, and very similar to Michael Pittman Jr., the touchdowns do not look sustainable. He's had 43 targets this season with 5 receiving touchdowns. Now, somebody who is starting him every single week, I'm not going to complain, but the reason that we have to have him below Michael Pittman Jr. in these tiers is just, I don't think we can project out the Pittsburgh Steelers offense to be anything close to the Indianapolis Colts offense at this point. Deebo Samuel does take a hit in our rest of season rankings for a multitude of reasons. 1, he's dealing with the heel injury. 2, Terry McLaurin's back in. And 3, at the same time, you do have the Jaden Daniels injury. Obviously, Deebo had been incredible so far this season. If you're looking at expectations for tonight's game on Underdog Fantasy, is currently a higher lower 9.5 fantasy points. Now, Jalen Waddle, you could honestly talk me into having him ahead of Deebo Samuel. You had the Miami Dolphins looking incredible in the Dome in Atlanta this past week. Now, a concern that I'm going to have will be, is this just a flash in the pan and do we get Miami back down to where they've historically been? I think the expectations is, this is probably just a 1 week good performance for Miami and they're probably coming back down to earth. Now, Brian Thomas, I don't know the health. He got injured before the bye week in London. Obviously, we're not getting too many injury updates through the bye week. So it will be very important to monitor what we have with the practice reports for Brian Thomas. And I'll be letting you know those every single day in the live stream as we get those updates. But if we are trying to project him out going into the future, it's not a good offense. He's averaged 11 fantasy points per game, which is lower than any wide receiver that we've talked about so far in this video. while at the same time, we can say that it looks like Travis Hunter's breaking out, and you have trade rumors circling around him in Jacksonville. Now, Jordan Addison averaging about 16 points per game is just either giving you a big play or giving you a touchdown every single week. It will be very interesting to see what we end up getting with JJ McCarthy under center. I know we keep on saying this, but maybe we just need to move Jordan Addison up to D tier, move him up to C tier, because I mean, he is outscoring Jefferson. If I want to sit here and go like, oh, I don't know if we can be excited about Addison if Jefferson's not that exciting with this kind of quarterback play, maybe Addison's just very similar to Jefferson at this point in fantasy, which I'm going to have a hard time projecting that. So we're going to have Addison much lower in these rankings, but that's the way things are currently trending. And then Keenan Allen averaging 15 fantasy points per game. Keenan Allen has been incredible. The issue now in my mind is you have Ladd McConkey dominating the targets over the past month. You have Gadsden now coming on as a viable tight end that will take targets. So just, it's a very crowded wide receiver room in Los Angeles. Now moving over to F tier, we are going to have Travis Hunter. Travis Hunter gives you the blow up against the Rams. It was in garbage time. And at the same time, you can say, well, had Brian Thomas injured, but Brian Thomas may get traded. Brian Thomas, we don't know if he's fully healthy right now. And Travis Hunter is now playing more offensive snaps than we've ever seen before. He has a career high in fantasy points, a career high in targets, a career high in receptions, a career high in receiving yards, his first receiving touchdown, a 29.8% team target share this past week. And we're going to expect rookie wide receivers to get better as time goes on. Marvin Harrison, it's just tough to be excited about him, right? Like Marvin Harrison this year is 24 receptions through 7 games played. He's averaging 3.5 receptions a game. This is almost identical to what we had in 2024 when he was at 3.6 receptions per game. If anything, it's going in the wrong direction. He went from 6.8 targets game as a rookie down to 5.7 this season. Now, I think he can get better, so we'll give him the benefit of the doubt and we'll rank him higher than his 10.8 fantasy points per game should indicate. T. Higgins, Stephon Diggs, these are the two guys I traded for. Nico Collins. Looking at what they did this past week, I mean, T. Higgins comes in. He has 2 targets in comparison to Jamar Chase with like 20. Now, he has the receiving touchdown, so he gives you a fine fantasy day, but I don't know how many games we can expect the Bengals to put that many points on the board. And then Stephon Diggs comes through, and he has a receiving touchdown as well, but he has 3 receptions for 14 receiving yards. So, not super excited about either of these players. Terry McLaurin's been horrible all season. Terry McLaurin's doing his best impersonation of Brandon Ayuk from last year, where you have the massive holdout, then you do nothing at the beginning of the season because you weren't prepared with camp, and then you followed up with getting injured because you weren't in shape because you weren't in camp due to the holdout. Like his season high in fantasy points is like 10.5 points. So I think it's hard to be excited about Terry. If I'm looking at his projections on Underdog Fantasy for tonight's game, they currently have him sitting at higher, lower 44.5 receiving yards, which is almost the same exact mark that you have with Deebo Samuel. But I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt to Deebo because we've seen the production this year. Xavier Worthy will be our next name. Xavier Worthy has gotten worse every single game this season. From 17.1 points against the Ravens to 11.1 against Jacksonville to 10.6 against Detroit to 7.8 against the Raiders. Now you have Rashee Rice coming through, and Rashee Rice taking considerable volume. So it's hard for me to get behind Xavier Worthy here, even though I really hope he gets there for underdog best ball teams. It looks like it's not happening. And there's no player I'm rooting on more than Quentin Johnston. And I want to be on the record, ladies and gentlemen, us making him our most drafted wide receiver in underdog basketball drafts at wide receiver 79. It's already a profitable pick with him going through and him averaging 20 points per game in the first month of the season. It was already perfect. Now, if he gives us anything else from this point, I'll be a happy camper. But it does look like Gadsden's coming in, and Gadsden is just taking his role, which is very sad for yours truly. Khalil Shakir, I understand, gives you the big blow up this past week, and maybe you want to go through and maybe you want to move Shakir higher than this. But the concern that I'm going to have with it is you have so many rumors just every single day circling this Buffalo team with the possibility that we are going to end up seeing them go out there and trade for an additional wide receiver. And Shakir is only averaging 12.2 points per game. So it's not like he's in a great spot. Now, our next name is going to be Chris Godwin. maybe I'm just making this ranking out of respect, because the few games that we've seen Godwin actually play this year, obviously he hasn't really done anything. And if we are going to look at what we have with the injury updates, zilch, nada. We've had nothing. He's missed the past 3 weeks. He has the bye week this week, so we're not going to hear anything until week 10. Ricky Pearsall's missed the past month. They decided not to put him on the IR, so you'd assume that Pearsall is back at any point now. But we're going to assume Jennings is healthier every week that goes by, and now you have George Kittle back in producing. Wan'Dale Robinson, very clearly the wide receiver one for Jackson Dart and the Giants, averaging 7.1 targets per game. But the issue that you're going to have is I just don't think it's a great offense. Matthew Golden, realistically, we need to move down these rankings just because how the hell could we have him over somebody like Romeo Doubs when he's averaging 3.7 targets per contest? DJ Moore, we have here at 40. I don't even think we can make an argument for DJ Moore here either. I guess outside of Luther Burden with a concussion, maybe this is what propels DJ Moore forward. And I will say as well, if you are looking at DJ Moore, you do have him at least seeing a season high when it comes to his targets in this offense this past week. And taking a look at what we have with Jakobi Meyers, Meyers averaging about 10 points per game so far this season, but coming out of the bye week, the expectations are probably going to be that you actually do have Brock Bowers both good to go and a potential Jakobi Meyers trade, but maybe a Meyers trade at this point would be great. I mean, hell, go out there and send him to New England, have them reunited. And honestly, I think Meyers could ball if he had Drake May at quarterback. Then our next two wide receivers will be Romeo Doubs, Matthew Golden. If we are looking at Doubs, he's averaging 6 targets per game in comparison to Matthew Golden at 3.7. Christian Watson is actually coming through and gets 4 targets his first week in here. So it does look like it's going to eat into these Packers wide receivers. And despite Jordan Love performing incredibly well, looks like most targets are going to get funneled through Tucker Kraft. And you're just going to have so many wide receivers spreading this ball out. And we'll probably get Jaden Reed back later as well. Now, Kayshon Boutte is averaging 12 points per game. This is more than Golden. This is more than Myers. This is more than Moore. This is more than Godwin. This is more than Higgins. This is more than Diggs, Terry, Worthy, Marvin Harrison, Travis Hunter, Brian Thomas. Like, obviously, if you are just taking previous fantasy points scored and ranking those players based off that singular stat, then Kayshon Boutte would be significantly higher than where we have him now. My thing is he's averaging 4.3 targets per game and 3.3 receptions per game. He's had 23 receptions and 5 touchdowns. There's no way this type of efficiency keeps up. Troy Franklin trending in the right direction. There's a real shot that Franklin, with one more solid performance, jumps up into F tier with how Bo Nix has been producing. Brayton Ayuk sounds like he could be coming back off the IR very soon. He's probably going to slowly but surely begin to creep up these rankings. Shaheed, you can start him if you're desperate. J-Mo, you can start him if you're desperate. Hope for a spike. You can say the same thing with Jennings, Keon Coleman, Josh Downs, Trey Tucker. All these are just desperation starts that have incredibly low floors, but you do get high ceilings. But I think that's all I got for you. I really appreciate you and really hope that I was able to help you out in some way with this. And of course, if you wanted to go through and check out any of those projections on Underdog Fantasy, you can find that link in the description. You can find it in the comment section. Code FLOCK will get you $100 added to your account after you play your first 5. And on top of that, you'll get a free Patrick Mahomes pick, higher, lower, half a total yard for tonight's game. And you'll get free questions that you can ask me in the live streams that I'm live streaming every single day until Christmas, answering your fantasy questions. But I think that's all I got for you. I really appreciate you and really hope I get to see you on the live stream later tonight.